I thrive when there's like a completely new playing field that's there. So my routine was really, let's start watching, even though I don't understand anything, in a very, again, methodical way, making Anki cards as I go and just trying to introduce, at that point, it was probably 20 new words a day, which is too much, but I did it.
So Josh, thank you so much. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the channel today. Just before we get into the details of your language learning, can you just give us a brief overview of your background in language learning? What languages are you learning currently and what languages have you learned?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again for having me. Just such a pleasure to talk again. So I spend most of my time language learning wise with German and Hebrew. It is a mix of the two. There's no specific study schedule or anything like that. I've learned Spanish in the past, but that was very much in a American high school setting. So I'd say that's not formal and certainly not long lasting. But German and Hebrew are both, I'd say, at this point, pretty integral parts of my life. And I have plans for other languages in the future, and I've dabbled in a couple of others, but those are where I feel like there's a real sense of progress and enjoyment.
Oh, brilliant! No, that's so good to hear. And what does your routine kind of look like for Hebrew and German?
Yeah, so the current routine is really trying to enjoy them as much as possible. I think it mostly consists of trying to do things that I would do in my normal life, and the activity just happens to be in German or in Hebrew. So whether that's YouTube or podcasts, I love listening to podcasts as I'm walking around. I don't know, like doing errands, bringing. We have a 2-year-old son, so when I walk with him to daycare, then on the way back, I'll always listen to something. Just any free time I have, trying to listen and just get more information into my head is great. And I've loved podcasts for 10, 15 years at this point. And so now the fact that I get to do it in German or Hebrew for information that I would otherwise also want to get is very, very helpful and enjoyable, and also a good challenge. There are other parts of my life that I think are also being spent in, I guess, with the languages. At least for me, I didn't grow up religious as a Jew in America. I grew up like culturally Jewish, and I became more religious in high school. And so for me, it was always frustrating, even before I was religious. Like, why are we doing like the Passover Seder, or why are we celebrating holidays in English? It just felt weird, for lack of a better term. If it feels like, there's 3,500 years of history and both historical history and then like linguistic history as well. So it was weird to hear a translation, but I didn't have the tools to learn things. And the reason that I bring this up is so now when, I guess as Jews, when we read the weekly Torah portion, that's done in Hebrew. It's biblical Hebrew. It's the easiest to understand, especially thinking in a modern context. But so there are sort of like commentaries, like weekly life lessons, that type of stuff that, at least in my opinion, most of the best writing is and has been done in Hebrew. I also recently bought a set of, there's a very famous German rabbi from the middle of the 1800s, who's like, certainly for German Jews, he's a very, very known figure, and even in America as well. And so I've been using a German commentary to the Torah to also expand. And I think because it is more academic and like non-tangible, like it's not so directly related. Like if I watch a YouTube channel like with a review of a Dyson vacuum, or if I watch coverage of the recent solar storms or something like that, that's stuff I'm super interested in now. But they're using a different type of language than commentaries on more esoteric subjects. But I'd say those ways of working in just really in really tangible ways, just things that I'm interested in, how I'd want to spend my time, and just try and work on the like ethical and moral parts of life. Being able to do that in German and Hebrew has been, I'd say that's where my biggest focus is now. And I'm making Anki cards as I'm learning a text from the 1850s, and I'm like, it's not shifting up my routine that much. It feels very much like embodied, like the language is more or less just a part of life and enables more of what I want to do.
Yeah, well, that's so interesting. I think the two kind of main takeaways I've got from that and your routine, etc., kind of, you've found a way to make the language really, really meaningful to you. You've tied that to who you are, your identity, and like your religion, etc., and your beliefs, and that kind of like makes it extra meaningful for you, I think. And then as well as that, you've managed to fill your day with like all the scraps of time. And I always recommend people to do this as well. I'm exactly the same. I love doing this. It's like all those, you just list out all those times in the day where you're like, I could be listening, but I'm not. and then you find a way to listen, and it honestly stacks up so much over time, doesn't it? Just these little habits that kind of pick up. Oh, that's so interesting. And it's
Yeah.
so interesting to hear kind of the similarities of that, like two kind of things with meaning and then with filling up your day as much as you can. I suppose we've talked about it a little bit, because I'm assuming you weren't reading those commentaries as a beginner. But how has your routine kind of changed over time? Like how's your routine gone from, from when you were an absolute beginner and didn't know any German, no Hebrew, and then to now where you're reading commentaries, filling your whole day with as much German and Hebrew as you can?
Yeah, so I do want to split it out between Hebrew and German because there are
Okay.
similarities which I'll call out, but the
Mm,
paths here are very different. German is more recent, so I'll start there, and I think it's also more directly relevant to
mm.
the current called content landscape that exists. So when I started learning German, basically my wife my wife wasn't sure whether or not she was going to want to speak German with our kids. My wife is originally from Germany.
Oh, I see.
And
Yeah.
I know that she spoke German, and but she was sort of on the fence of whether or not she wanted to speak with our future kids. We didn't have kids
Hmm.
at this point. I think it was even
Mm.
yeah, we weren't. It's like we weren't even expecting or anything. It was just like at some point it would be nice
Yeah.
for me
Yeah.
to be able to learn German with her. So I bring that up. So routine wise, I was thinking of talking, and I was hopefully I had that on the horizon. So I went on YouTube and just tried to find German content. I came across the Easy German YouTube channel, and
Yeah.
it's to me it's such a shame that they call it Easy German because it's interviews in German, it's all explanations in German. So
Yeah.
as a complete beginner, even if you watch their video in slow German, nothing means anything to
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
But I think that actually worked really, really well for me because I find that I thrive when there's like a completely new playing field that's there, and even if everything's completely unknown. So I started watching these Easy German videos, literally going through, pausing anytime that there was a new line of dialogues that I could make a new Anki card or make a new note
Yeah.
card. I originally started, I had a stack of 400 or 500 cards, and then I brought
Oh,
them all
wow.
to I
Yeah.
brought them all to Anki because I found out about it. So my routine was really, let's start watching, even though I don't understand anything. It was really a process of let's watch one video a day. Some days it would take 20 minutes for a 5-minute video. Some days it would
Mm.
take an hour plus for a 15-minute video, and really just trying to dissect that. But knowing that again in the future, I was hoping to be able to speak and be able to understand more colloquial language. And so that process, I paired that with a small like intro to German textbook. It was like
Okay.
I don't even know if you can call it a textbook because it's a very, it's not long and it's not particularly in depth. That
Yeah.
helped make sense of things like separable verbs and some like the baseline grammar stuff. I hate
Mm.
grammar. I don't understand grammar in English. I don't really understand it in German either. So I didn't want to spend a lot of time there. It was really
Yeah.
just so that I
Yeah.
wasn't completely lost of like, why is this part of the word at the end of the sentence as opposed to 15 words
Yeah. Yeah.
earlier
Yeah.
with the other half that it belongs with? So I like grammar study was a part of the journey very early on in a not so methodical way. It's just to try and get some of the vocab and understand what I was seeing in the videos. So I had those two paired together, and then a few months in, or after doing that for 2 months, we went on a trip to Germany to visit some family there. And
Mm.
that's where I bought my first book in German. And we just went into a bookstore, went to the science section because it's a big interest of mine. And
Yeah.
I bought a book called Explain It Like I'm Five, which I think is probably one of the most important books in my life. Certainly for German, I can say that it is the most important book. And it just
Yeah.
became a game of, so the broad structure of the book is a question and then an explanation in about a page. So to me, doing a page, even if you're really, really like slogging through the material, is doable, especially if the
Yeah.
questions are interesting. So it'd be like, why don't woodpeckers get headaches when they're pecking on a tree? And it's like, oh, let's explain some of the anatomy of a woodpecker. And it's explained as if a 5-year-old can understand it. But I think 5-year-olds still have 3,000 to 4,000 words that they know, which is
Yeah.
as a beginner that's quite a bit more than you know. So it was a very, very helpful book, very interesting as well, because each page was varied. And then I just started working through that in a very, again, methodical way, making Anki cards as I go and just trying to introduce, at that point, it was probably 20 new words a day, which is too much, but I did it. I think we'll probably talk about this a little bit, but this is
Yeah.
on the intensive reading
Right.
side of the
Right.
house. And I think that like really that process of watching content that I enjoyed, pausing as I needed to listen to it, and then reading as well. Reading is something that I love doing. I don't do it nearly as much as I should. And I think if there were no other responsibilities as much as I would, been really, really important to me in addition to Anki. And then, so that's in the world of German. And then on the Hebrew side, it's almost all text based. The US, or like the Jewish community in the US, has a very interesting relationship with the Hebrew language, where like all of the prayers are in Hebrew for the most part, especially in the more traditional like communities that are there. So I learned how to read Hebrew when I was in kindergarten through sixth grade. I knew how to read it. I could not tell you a single word of what anything meant, which is a very interesting, like, weird ritualized thing. And I think gets back to why I didn't want to just say words that I didn't understand as I got older. But it was helpful to have a foundation of like, I sounded like an American speaking Hebrew, but it was sense for the language. Once I was as I got into high school, it was a very similar process to the book in German that I mentioned, where it was, okay, here's a text from whether it's 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. I'm just going to work through it. I want to understand it. This is something that I, either as a part of a challenge in my life or whatever it is, let me start to just understand it, and I'll go through it and make a note card for every single word I didn't know. Or I think I also started I would write the translation of the word over top of the word, like just above it in the text that I was reading. And these texts were like not appropriate for my level at all, but I wanted to learn them enough that it was worth spending a week on a page or however long it took. And then that's where it was like this mix of intensive and extensive reading that, just more and more over time, I was just able to build things up. And then, I was able to branch out more into sort of modern Hebrew.
Brilliant. No, it's so interesting to hear your story and kind of see how intensive and extensive immersion have played roles in like both languages for you. I think it's really interesting. You've kind of changed my opinion on something, Josh, because I used to be very much like, you should only focus on things at your level, like, if you can't understand 80-90% of it, don't dig into it. But now I'm very much on the facts, like, no, it depends. Like, if you have something that you understand less than that, it holds your attention, you're interested, and you're willing to work with it and do it intensively, then like that's probably going to be even more beneficial than if you just watch something that you can understand the majority of. So I think it's so inspirational, the fact that you had the drive to kind of sit down and just be like, well, I'm really interested in this, I'm just going to dig into it one word at a time, kind of go and then kind of add that to Anki as you went along. I mean, I suppose we've spoken mainly about intensive immersion now. What would you say in terms of the extensive immersion? I mean, I know you did a really good video on this recently, which everyone can go and check out if they're interested. By the way, definitely go and check out Josh's channel. It's honestly amazing. So yeah, how did you kind of balance intensive and extensive immersion?
That is a very good question. I think I would break it up into, I guess, reading versus listening, or listening and watching. So I'll talk reading first. To me, reading I found to be very, let's say for my style, found to be harder to do extensive, meaning a lot of reading, before I had reached a critical mass of words. I don't know if that was probably a few thousand. It's probably 2,000 or 3,000. So almost a year of getting comfortable with German. And same thing for Hebrew, where I did keep going through things, but there's the point of, I'm going through so many words that I can understand from context, but if I don't get them into Anki, then they're going to be lost forever until I cross them again. I think skills wise, you definitely want to build up to get to a point where you're comfortable. Though that being said, if you have a graded reader and then you do get to that level early, or you have material that enables you to do extensive reading, I think that it is unbelievably invaluable, because the intensive reading really trains that sense of your intuition, because now you might not be able to explain why something feels right or how you understand it, but it's a magical thing to, like, for that to take place in your hands in another language. So I definitely recommend trying to get to that point as quickly as possible, just so you can enjoy yourself more, because I think intensive reading is often a very negative experience for people. Not necessarily, but it very often is. That's where I think extensive reading is something that you should really just try to break that threshold, so that you can get to the point where you can just keep reading. I don't know if you can see it here on the shelves behind me, but I have the full Harry Potter set in German, and I have it in the other room for Hebrew as well. And it's not because I love Harry Potter. It's not because it's my favorite book in the world, but it's because it's a series that I know solidly well. I've read it I've read through the full series now, in English, German, and in Hebrew. And I know the story solidly well, but it's that I know that I've forgotten so many of the small details and the little scenes here or there that as I'm going through it again, the reading however 4 or 5 thousand pages in a language, even if you know the story, it solidifies so much of
Yeah,
your
definitely.
understanding, and also it over the course of the series, it introduces you to thousands and thousands of words.
Mm,
I remember I did a video last year
mm,
looking at what percentage of words in Harry Potter were related to like wizardry,
mm.
witchcraft, England, all of that kind of stuff. I
Yeah.
think it was less than 2%. I think I did the same thing for like Breaking Bad and a couple other shows. And to me, the point of extensive reading is so helpful because even if it's on a very specific topic, you're still getting such good exposure to so many different words. You're building that intuition, and it's so helpful once you get to the point where it doesn't feel like you're walking through syrup, or you're trying to like really push or pull yourself through something. I do think on the other hand though that for certainly my style, and I think this gets back at like the bigger questions of like identity and interest, that like if I don't care what I have to do what I want to do. Like if it's going to take 50 dictionary lookups per page, but I really want to read or understand whatever I'm going through, then I'm going to do it. And that's where it might be more helpful to do extensive reading, because intensive
Mm.
reading can just be so deflating, so draining sort of
Yeah.
mentally.
Yeah.
But again, where if language is the tool to enable you to do what you want in your life, then at a certain point, you're just going to do what you can. So that's
Yeah.
all in the reading camp, and I'm definitely on team like start intensively reading as early as you're comfortable with. Again, motivation
Yeah.
plays a big factor here. But then I will say, on the other hand, for listening, I remember a month into learning German, I started listening to podcasts from Die Zeit, and I spoke with my mother-in-law who speaks German and has been very helpful in some specific ways for like grammar questions that I have. I remember her saying like that seems like very high level German when I
Yeah.
mentioned to her that I was listening. I was like, yeah, it is, and I don't understand. It's not even I don't understand. It's I don't even catch 95% of the words. So
Yeah.
perhaps I could be
Yeah.
understanding more, but it's there's so much that I'm not even catching because the speed or the pronunciation,
Yeah.
whatever it is. But I remember going for runs, and I like if I have an hour long run, then I can listen to a full podcast. Maybe you're getting in 5 or 10,000 words in the language, which is super helpful, even if you're not understanding it. It trains your ear.
Mm.
It is for me. It was like this great like Easter egg hunt of like, oh, I know this word from Anki. Oh, I know this phrase. I
Yeah.
recognize it. And so there are just these flashes of motivation that come in
Mm.
extensive watching, listening, reading that
Mm.
that are so rewarding. So I would definitely say for watching and listening, it's worth it, but know that you have to have a lot more content to get the same like growth as you
Mm.
would with intensive activities. I know that was
Yeah.
long-winded, but hopefully makes
No,
sense.
no, no, that really makes sense. Yeah, I think that's such a, and it gives people such a clear, like, way of doing things, right? Because a lot of people will come to me and be like, oh, I've just started Mandarin. What do I do? I don't want to use a textbook, Will. Like, what do I do? And it's like, I think maybe this is a really good suggestion. Like, find stuff that you're interested in and just dig into it and just learn word by word and to build up that base vocabulary using things that you're really interested in until you're at that kind of point that we've talked about, this critical mass where you can kind of, whether that be graded readers or actually native content, you can just dive in and really start enjoying the language and then
Yeah.
rely less so on the intensive side of things. I think that's really interesting. And I'd say it's quite similar to me. Like I was listening to podcasts after a couple of months of Mandarin and just trying to listen as much as I possibly could. And again, at that point, you don't pick everything up. But and I also started watching TV shows at that point as well. And it was really hard, but it was really worth it. So no, definitely. I think trying to expose yourself, a lot of people put off the kind of diving into native content for so long. But then when will you ever do it if you don't? So you kind of have to force yourself at some point to just go for it, don't you? Even if it's a bit deflating and you're like, oh, but I think also you kind of really celebrated the little wins. Like you would be like, oh, I know this word. I learned this the other day on Anki. Like you were able to keep yourself motivated because you didn't see it as like, oh, I can't understand most of it. You saw this as, oh, I understood a bit more than I did yesterday. Like, oh, I understood this word and that phrase. I think that's
Exactly.
really cool.
Yeah,
Cool.
you need to be comfortable being proud of having learned a sentence. Like that, I think
Yeah.
that's the humility learning a language like this can bring out. And
Yeah.
whether that's intensively, like I remember the first time I got the first Harry Potter book and I tried reading it with my wife there, who's a native German speaker. It took us I think 35 minutes to go through the first paragraph, which is 3 or 4 sentences. So like that is such a humbling, like you feel like it's less than an infant because you're an adult, but you have the skills of an infant.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you need to be like, it was exhausting, but that the pride of like, okay, I understood 10 things from there, whether it's individual words, how they work together,
Yeah.
even just understanding a sentence. And I think the same thing works for the intensive learning, or sorry, the
Yeah.
extensive learning, where if you're listening to a podcast, like the first time you understand a joke in another language, the first time you catch a word, whatever it is, it's like that, having that humility to just celebrate the tiniest little thing. Like that's how you do that for long enough. And it's not that long. Like you do that for 6 months, a
Mm.
year, as you keep going, it's your skills really can build up.
Exactly, yeah, and it keeps you motivated, right? Like
Yeah.
if you're constantly focusing on like how much I can't understand rather than how much I can, then you're never going to be happy with yourself. So
Yeah.
yeah, definitely, I think that's such a good recommendation. I was going to ask, so we've kind of spoken about your routine. How would you recommend that someone actually goes about building their routine then? Like, I suppose we'll probably have to kind of split this into different levels. But yeah, how would you recommend that people build a routine in language learning?
What's coming to mind is figuring out the smallest thing that you could do that you would do and starting there. Because if you're someone who
Mm,
uses like you've started using Anki and you're like, oh, I want to learn 20 new words a day. But then after a month, if you're going to be doing Anki for an hour a day and you have no interest in doing that, don't
mm,
do it. With that in mind, figuring out what you like, what you have interest in, and then figuring out
mm,
what works to help push you forward. I definitely think that finding compelling content
mm,
is a great place to start, because I think that people, especially or oftentimes online, there's a really big focus on Anki and the number of words that you know. I mean, I think admittedly, I think certainly the number of words you know is one of the best indicators, and for me was the best indicator of feeling like I
mm,
was progressing, being able to understand more, being able to have more enjoyable content.
mm.
But I think that that's if the only way you're engaging with the language is through textbook study or through reviewing vocab note cards, you're not engaging with the language in a way that's meaningful to you, most likely,
Mm.
unless you're one of the 1% of people where that's really motivating. I think by
Yeah,
engaging with TV shows, with books, with things that you care about and that also would, let's say, are a part of life for people who are living the language or living with the language, that's where you should start. Like I remember when I learned Spanish for 6 years in American middle school and high school, every couple of weeks we would watch a 2-minute clip of a TV show or of an interview. And like, that is the language. The language is not sitting and going through conjugation tables or anything like that. And
yeah,
that's why I merged out of 6 years of schooling with very, very small, I guess, a small pool of abilities. So I would say finding content in a way that you can work in regularly, whether that's one episode a day. And I think getting a specific, there's a concept of a SMART goal that is specific,
yeah,
measurable, actionable. I forget the R, and then T is time bound. Maybe R
mm,
is realistic.
yeah,
But so figuring out a piece of content that you're good enjoying every day. So whether it's a page a day or if it's 10 minutes a day or one episode a
yeah,
day, whatever the right amount is based on your current life schedule and all of that.
mm,
And I'd say engaging with it in the way that is most helpful to you. So in my case, that was for easy German, I would pause and look up every word that I didn't know or made sure that I understood everything. That was most days. And
mm,
then some days I would just watch an interview through all the way. And then maybe I would watch it again just to try and see, maybe I got an extra 30% on the second watch or an extra
mm,
3%. But again, just trying to find that sense of content so that I'm enjoying it, but also so that there's some friction in a way that's helpful. And then I know that it is painful for a lot of people, but I do not know of a single tool that is more powerful than Anki or an equivalent of using
yeah,
some structured way. Somewhere here, I have a box of 2 to 3,000 note cards in Hebrew. It was worth it. It is time. It's not as much time as you're afraid that it will be, but I think that is it's it's forcing yourself to recall information, which makes it stick more, which means that when you
mm,
engage with content, then you're going to be having a better time. So I think that those two elements of a routine are picking content that is enjoyable in a way that you want to spend some time, and then
mm,
also building that routine of learning in the more traditional sense. Though,
mm,
add in audio, add in funny pictures, add in
yeah,
whatever funny example sentences you want, so that the medicine's a little bit sweeter as it goes down. And then the last point, just routine, that I'll say is, like we spoke about the last time, when we spoke, and like you mentioned before, like if this is about you really learning a language and you really wanting to get as much exposure and as much intuition as you can, you have so much more time in the day than you realize. So if you're doing dishes, if you're going for a walk, I don't know, with a dog, or just because you're outside, if you're working out, if you're doing things in or if you're doing things in your native language, like if you're speaking English or listening to podcasts, like if you're listening to Huberman Lab, or if you're listening to some conversational podcast, whatever it is, there's no reason, unless you're getting real life-saving advice, which I doubt most people are from podcasts, switch that over to language learning, even if you don't understand the majority of what's going on, because with a good routine, eventually you will.
Guys, if you're enjoying this interview and want some more tips specifically on how to improve your Mandarin Chinese, I've got the thing just for you. I have a 7-day email course in which I break down my complete Mandarin learning method. As well as this, I'll give you a couple of goodies. First of all, we have a 50-sentence starter PDF and a 30-sentence pattern PDF. So with lots of examples, so you can start applying these easy chunks in daily conversation. As well as this, you'll join over 900 students in being part of my chunk of the week, where I go and break down one small phrase in Chinese that will make you sound more native and give you loads of examples of how to use it every single week. Guys, I'll see you inside. If you're interested, go and sign up using the link below, or you can scan the QR code on the screen right now. I'll see you there. So I think the kind of key takeaways from that I've kind of gained from what you're saying, Josh, is and I'm going to apply this to my Spanish learning, which I really need to get back into. So I think it's about having these smart goals, like finding something that you actually want to dig into, whether that be something like Easy German or like a book that you're really interested in, and have a realistic goal of, like, I don't know, a page or two a day or a video a day.
Yep.
And then breaking that down into Anki. And we'll talk about Anki in a bit, actually, in terms of the specifics of how to do this. So breaking that down, going through and learning or like, a set new number of words a day from like the thing that you've been engaging in. And then as well as doing this, so this, let's say this is probably, I don't know, like 20-25% of your time. If you're able to make good use of the rest of your time in the day, the other remaining 80% could just be filled with like as much listening as you can possibly get, right? From the other times that you have during the day that you're not making use of that you could be. Yeah, that's such an awesome routine. I really like that, actually.
And I'd also add on one other thing that just came to mind that I'm realizing that I did is you make it time bound, where like you assess it every once in a while, in the sense that, like, if you say I'm going to read one page in Harry Potter, or if I'm going to go through one episode of this TV show that I like, just say I'm going to do it for one season or for 30 days. So that way, that there's a finish line that you can reach, and this isn't forever. So if it feels like it's too much, like there are going to be some days where you want to do more, but there are going to be a lot of days where you don't want to do all of the stuff that you want to. And the same thing for Anki. If you say I'm going to do it for 10 new words a day or 20 new words a day, like just do that for a little, or know that you only have to do that for a little bit, and then you can reassess. I think that's also something that's freeing, because that it's not going to last forever. And it also means that there's like the sense of responsibility that, okay, I just have to do this for a little while, and then that'll help keep you motivated, or it'll enforce motivation on the days that you don't want to stick with it, because okay, this is something I committed to, and I can stick with it for a little longer. I've done that did that especially with reading, where I'll read 10 pages a day, and I might put it a little bit higher than is comfortable. But knowing that it was short term, that meant that, the next month, if I wanted to, I could take it a little bit easier and do that with a clear conscience, because making sure everything fit what my needs were.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good idea as well. Yeah. Having like this really clear goal and being like, it's time bound for a month. And then you can kind of, I think it's this case of tricking yourself. Like I do a lot of studying. Like you kind of have to trick yourself into doing it. So I'll be like, oh, it's okay. I'm only going to study for 25 minutes. Like you just study for 25 minutes. And then I know that in those 25 minutes, I won't get distracted, because I'll feel really guilty if I do, because it's only 25 minutes. So I think it's that, and I think you found another way to trick yourself, more of a long-term goal, like, oh, I'm going to do this for a month, like just push through for this month, and then worst case we can readjust. Like I think having these mechanisms in mind to kind of keep you motivated and keep you on track and keep you consistent. Oh, that's such good advice. I really like that.
And I like that idea of tricking yourself, because I know I started before by saying, like, being able to engage like currently like more with like religious texts or things that should be like if I'm a let's say if I'm part of if I built my lifestyle around them, that should be very motivating. But I know,
Yeah.
just like you said, I have to trick myself into whether it's getting up and
Yeah.
stop watching Netflix and doing something that's more meaningful. But I think that's a like motivation is something that's very fickle, and
Yeah.
finding ways to trick yourself is a great way to
Yeah.
put it, because it has a playful element to it. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
like that a lot.
Definitely. And I think for a bit of background here, just moving on to Anki. So I first came across your channel, Josh, when I saw your video that you did about learning German, and you were like 10,000 words in 2 years. And I was like, wow, that is absolutely awesome. And I love that video and how you break down like going into Anki. But if you don't mind, obviously I'll do, like everyone can go and watch that video. I think that'd be very beneficial. But would you be okay to kind of go into the details now of like, what do you actually do with Anki? I know there's like loads of different people on the internet kind of saying different ways of using it in the language learning community. What's your way of doing things?
Yeah, so I'll try and include a couple of caveats as I go, but I'll tell you what I did as opposed to what I would
Okay.
recommend, because there are some differences there.
Okay. Oh,
But yeah,
cool. Okay. Yeah.
my basic process for Anki is, because I came from the world of physical note cards, was to have one side of an Anki card with a word in German and the other side in English. And if I had a word in German that had multiple meanings or uses in English, I would just include multiple definitions on the same card. So
Right.
it doesn't atomize the concept. It's not the perfect Anki card, but it was good enough to learn 10,000 words and be able to read and watch basically anything I want. So it works.
Exactly. Yeah. It
So
definitely worked.
yeah, so the basic process was, this is what I did, not necessarily what I recommend, is I would immerse in whatever I wanted to. Again, easy German videos, videos on specific topics that I was interested in, or books. And anytime I came across a word that I wanted to remember, I would make an Anki card for it in that format exactly. It would just be the baseline German word. So it wouldn't be like says, it would be to say, except in German. And then I would have the English translation, and I would have the card go both ways. So it's, I guess, basic
Cool.
and reverse. So it'd be German to English, and then the next day or a few days later, it would be English back to German. That would all be sort of fed in automatically within Anki. And the tricky part about that is that I say that anytime I came across a word that I wanted to know, I would make a card for it. Following the logic of what I just said, that means that every single word that I came across that I didn't know, I would make an Anki card for. So I can say with certainty that that book, Explain It Like I'm Five, I know every single word in that book because I made an Anki card for every single word in that book. And that was the case for most of the books that I ended up reading, and a lot of the content that I would watch. Same thing with Harry Potter. I know there are some exceptions here, because as a religious Jew, we don't use electricity on Friday night and Saturday. So any reading that I was doing that on it's called Shabbat was extensive reading by default, because I didn't have Google Translate. I couldn't make Anki cards. So there are some words that I've read that I haven't made Anki cards for. But it was very much I would have the book open on the desk in front of me. I would have I used Google Translate because I know Google Translate is pretty reliable for German, but you pick your favorite dictionary of choice, whether it's in English or whatever your native language is, or I know the concept of monolingual cards. If you want to do that, you can. Format was very much, let's just make cards for all the words that I wanted to know. And I would introduce, did my Anki cards every single day. I can look back. I think it's something like 12 or 1300 days, and I've only missed 8 or 9 of them. They're all on days, I guess, religious holidays. Because let's say if the Jewish Sabbath is Friday night through Saturday night at sundown, that means I can do my Anki reviews earlier in the day on Friday and later in the night on Saturdays.
Yeah.
But there are a couple of cases where, like, if a holiday comes up on the Sabbath, or if it's a 2-day holiday, then I'll miss my Anki reviews. But you could say I did my Anki reviews religiously, and it's 99.4% of days that I've done them.
Yeah.
So I would always make sure to do the Anki reviews, and I was constantly feeding in the appropriate amount of new cards. At times, that's been as low as like now, where it's very much, if I catch a new word as I'm immersing, then I'll add in a card. So it's maybe a word or two a day, if that. But then there were also times where I was doing 25 to 30, if not closer to 40 words a day, especially once I got like after a year or two. I know German is a little bit easier, especially given some of like the linguistic overlap with English. Though I oftentimes wasn't making cards. I think that's another point I can say in just a second.
Yeah.
So I would be introducing a lot of cards, though it is half of the number of words as cards, because I mentioned that I would do
Oh, of course.
cards for
Yeah,
English to
yeah.
German, German back to English. So if I was doing 40 new cards a day, that's really 20 new words per
New
day.
words. Right, right, right.
So that makes it a little bit more realistic. But all of that being said, I think at the height I was maybe doing 350 to 400 German cards a day. But because the cards are so simple, and it's really just, okay, I see a word either in English and then I have to guess German, or German and then have to guess English. The cards would take on average anywhere between 3 and 6 seconds. So
Oh, wow. That's fast. Yeah.
yeah, it's pretty fast. It felt like it was building a good intuition as well, for me in German, which I think has definitely paid off. And that meant that sometimes like I would get above that 30-minute mark, but for the most part, it's usually been between 15 to 20 minutes per day. And then I was able to get to that 10,000 word mark just by very, very basic cards. I would add pictures for anything that it was helpful. Oftentimes that was like nouns, because I know that I can certainly recommend that it's for more concrete things, having that extra picture is helpful, and definitely things that are like relevant to me, and things that I find interesting and captivating. Like I remember there's a word in German called entweichen, which means to escape or to like slip out. And when I look, the tip that I have for getting good pictures is not to Google the word in your native language that you know, but to just put the word in, let's say in my case, German, put that into Google Images and look what pictures come up. And there's a picture of a guy like holding his butt as if he was letting a fart sneak out. And I had that card. I showed it to my wife. She thought it was hilarious. And now that word has stuck with me really, really well. So that's something, there's probably a more, if I was taking like a formal class, I'm sure that whatever stern German teacher would not approve of that method. But I know that word now because of that, because of that picture. So, and these are like the process of reviewing cards was quick, and having these little indicators, or sometimes I would add an example sentence, but there was basically like, accoutrement to the main point of just English word, German word. Do I know it? Yes or no? And very, very simple.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the beauty of this method, that it's like so fast and so direct. Like to be able to do like 300 odd reviews in 30 minutes, that's brilliant, to be honest.
Yeah.
Again, I'm definitely gonna be learning from you on this, so I'm not gonna lie. So definitely gonna try and apply it to my own learning as well.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say my speaking has, I don't know if you could say has suffered, or like the focus there was much more on the vocabulary acquisition as opposed to the output. And then based on our last conversation, I've been working more with the closed deletion cards. I've made a few hundred, if not more than 1,000 of those already. And so that's been very, very useful for the speaking side, both for knowing how a word shows up in context, and then also for the sort of the remixing method that you've mentioned, like a very controlled remixing, so that you can work on your speaking skills. But yeah, I think that very basic method, I think it also meant that as I was going, one other point that I realized I should say is that I would oftentimes have a very big backlog of cards. So I know there are some people who say, I'm only going to make 10 new words per day, and then I'll just immerse extensively. Like I'll just keep watching, and I'm not going to make more Anki cards as I go.
Yeah.
For me, because I wanted to know every word I was coming across, even if that was short-sighted, I'm still happy I did it. But that meant that there were some times where I would have, even introducing 20 or 30 or 40 new cards a day, I might have 500 or 600 cards in a backlog that are slowly being fed in day after day. For me, that was not at all an issue, because I knew, again, it's going to take a couple of weeks or months, but it will all come.
Again, I think that's a really good recommendation, because this is something I've been guilty of, that I kind of write a word down and then never come back to it. I'll have like this long list of words, and I'll never actually feed them into Anki like I'm supposed to. So I think making that habit of like, if you're doing, having this set time of intensive learning where you've kind of accepted the fact that it's probably not going to be that enjoyable, but you're just going to sit down and learn every word and put it straight into Anki and make that habit. That's probably really good for preventing that. Even if you have a massive backlog, it's fine, because it's going to get reviewed eventually. So that's brilliant, I suppose. Yeah, I mean, you've covered most of my thoughts on Anki on Anki really with this. I wanted to ask. So you've already mentioned your time. We've spoken briefly about dealing with multiple meanings. Like this is a difficult one. I suppose you've talked about what you used to do. I was interested. How would you go about doing it now then with the multiple meanings, or would you use the same method?
I still often use the same method when I'm trying to
Yeah.
learn a new word, but
Mm.
I know how short-sighted it is. And I think if I was only relying on Anki for my language learning, then I would adjust the way that I'm doing things. But
Mm.
because I know Anki, like you mentioned, is 20%, 25%, maybe even
Mm.
less of the time that I'm spending per day with the languages,
Mm.
that means that I'm seeing a lot of these words in so many different contexts as I'm
Yeah.
immersing, and that's normally where I'm relying on things or
Mm.
on those other meanings to come up, because I think that there are always going to be edge cases, even of words that don't, let's say, strictly have multiple meanings, or like if you looked in the dictionary,
Yeah.
it's not going to show up as a common meaning. So I think
Mm.
just getting more of that exposure to the language
Mm.
itself is probably more helpful than trying to like methodically hunt down all of
Yeah.
the ways that the word can be used. That's at
Mm.
least, I think that would be my recommendation. I'm thinking back again to this Spanish
Mm.
class that like I had a great teacher. I enjoyed the dynamics in the classroom, but
Mm.
it didn't work of like trying to focus just on the intellectual side of language learning, as opposed to if the homework had been go watch 2 episodes of a show every night for
Mm.
for a couple of years. I'm sure that would have done a lot more for comprehension and
Mm.
speaking than the classwork itself. And I think the same thing applies where as you're trying to look up what multiple meanings of a word are and
Mm.
trying to solidify those, I guess now I would say like, okay, do a at least like one or two closed deletion sentences for
Mm.
each of the different meanings that are there. And I think
Mm.
that definitely can work. But then for me,
Mm.
it's a question of would I want to spend my time doing that
Definitely.
to
Mm.
understand more, or just let me go out into the wild and understand more, and whatever I'm
Mm.
coming across, that's good enough, because I'm following it based on my interests, not what someone else is telling me this is how you should learn German. Like, no, I'm going to watch a video on the
Exactly.
solar
Yeah.
cycles or SpaceX
Yeah.
developments or I don't know, social media influencers,
Yeah.
just because like these are things that are I find interesting to hear in German,
Mm.
and then that gets me a lot of that context and meaning.
Definitely. I think that's such a good kind of going back to the basics of this and not like it's so easy to get stressed about like, oh, I don't know. Oh, this word has so many different meanings. Oh, how am I ever going to learn them? And a lot of it is just feeling it, isn't it? It's as you said, like if you read and listen enough and engage in conversation enough, you're going to come across these words a lot of times, especially ones with lots and lots of different uses, because they're probably going to be quite common if that's the case.
No,
And then you'll gradually get a good feeling, a good intuition of how they're used. I think that's a really good point. So we've talked a lot about kind of inputs, the two types of input, I suppose, with intensive and extensive, and then we've talked about how to use Anki to almost skyrocket your vocabulary learning and really boost what you're getting out of the input. How did this all transition to you to output with your speaking?
my output started in a very similar way to the way that I did Anki, which was one word at a time, pun intended with the name of the channel, where it really started, certainly on the German side, was as a like when my wife would be speaking with her, catching up with her mom, or
Mm.
there would be some context in which my wife would be looking for a word, and I would know it just based on Anki. Once again, it probably took a couple of months, if not a little
Yeah.
bit more. But then like that started to snowball, where my wife began to rely on me a little bit more for for helping with words. And so I think that process of the cards going both ways was very helpful to set things up.
Mm.
So having to look at an English word and say, how would you say that in German, was a helpful start. But really over the past 6 7 months, I've started working with language partners. I've been
Mm.
using italki, and I have a video coming out where I've been analyzing the transcripts. Like I record the sessions, make a
Mm.
transcript, and I've done some analysis of my speaking patterns
That's really
from those
cool. Oh
sessions.
wow.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
hoping it'll be an interesting video. That's been very, very helpful. And I think for me, I've had this issue with in Hebrew, whether it's talking with Israelis or talking with other people who just speak who just speak Hebrew, and it's the same thing with Germans, where there's such a kindness that comes out in people. At least for me as an English speaker, and people who speak
Mm.
Hebrew or German are oftentimes also, they can at least understand English. Then there's just just like let's switch the conversation over
Oh
to
no.
English, like the concept of the English black hole, like we spoke
Yeah.
about. And I found that working with language partners, like if the instruction is, I want to be speaking most of the time because I'm paying for the time together. Please don't use any English words and just let me know, like try and help me avoid using an English word if I can't think of what the German is. That process of just being patient and just letting like the first half hour of every conversation is just going to suck where like your brain is trying to get up to speed, especially when you're first starting out.
Yeah.
It's just going to be really, really hard. But over time, each session, it gets 5% less hard. And then there's like you build up confidence as you keep going. And then as you identify more mistakes or ways to fix what you're saying or to say things better, it's very similar to Anki, where you have to plug up all these holes one at a time. And I think being able to celebrate little wins, like the first time that you catch that you have the right match between gender, like the gender of a word or in a conjugation or something like that. I've tried a bunch of other things. Like I've tried recording myself and talking, but that always seemed to fizzle out because like I can only talk about my day so much. And and not older, but like I'm a guy, I've been working for almost 10 years professionally. And like, I have a like a 2-year-old kid. Like the days are not that different from one another. So then it gets a little boring if I just describe the day. My hope is to try and experiment a little bit more with like, just talk on, there's like a New York Times list of like, I don't know if it's 500 or 700 essay topics. And it's like, I need to talk today about vaping among teenagers, or I need to talk about the role of healthcare in tax law or something like that. It's just, like I've thought about, or I've tried that a little bit, and it's been interesting, but it's just having the social enforcement of having a someone to work with has been good. I guess I'll also throw out the fact that my wife and I don't speak much in German, certainly not as much as I would hope, because it feels weird to make my wife a language partner. I very much want to have good demarcations of the relationship. But that has also come up. I don't know, probably once a month we'll speak for an hour in German, but it's work in progress.
Yeah. Oh no, definitely. No, that's really interesting to hear. I suppose it is kind of that gradual process, like accepting the fact that it's going to be really hard at the start and then getting used to it. I'm really interested in this speech patterns analysis. I really look forward to that video. I was going to ask, so we've kind of talked about your transition. What are your recommendations? Like, I suppose one, I want to ask you, the really controversial question in language learning is which is, when should you start speaking? We can talk about that, and then I'd like to know your recommendations of how do people who have been very much input based as you were yourself, how do they then kind of, what are your recommendations for them to kind of move into output and improve in output? So I'll ask you the first one first. Sorry, I've been rattling off questions here. So when do you think people should start speaking?
If we're thinking strictly accuracy wise, my gut says people should wait to start speaking. So I do want to follow that up very, very quickly with the fact that if waiting to speak means that you're not going to continue with the language, then start speaking whenever you want. That to me is a very... It's the same thing with watching content. Like if sitting in a course is going to make you give up on German or Mandarin, don't sit in the course. Like I know a lot of people have outside factors that mean that, like, if you need a certain level to go to university or to travel or to work in another country, then fine, do what's necessary. But I think the same thing to me applies with input, where as long as you're not just freestyling and making up your own language as you go, as long as there's some grounding in understanding, like if you start speaking after a month of learning the language, you're going to make mistakes 100%. But you're also, for most people who are watching this, like fully formed adults who can correct mistakes, where it might be more work later on and you might have bad patterns to start with. But again, if that doesn't matter to you and you have, and that's your inclination, then I would definitely honor the person's, like what keeps a person motivated in the language.
Exactly.
And knowing that that's, like, my style doesn't have to fit. Like if I only want to speak perfectly, first of all, I don't speak perfectly, so I'm breaking my own best wishes. But I just don't think it's worth waiting just because there's like some guilt provided from whether it's real language learners or the online culture around it, that like, no, you're going to solidify bad mistakes and then everything you do is completely worthless. It's like, okay, chill, take it easy. This is a hobby, or it's something that's going to enable more than
Yeah.
just a hobby.
Yeah, definitely not. I think that's such a balanced opinion of it. Like I'm kind of on the same side as you with this. I think I don't know, did I start speaking Mandarin a bit early? Yes, probably, yeah. Like if I look back at it, was my level of comprehension high enough to do the amount of speaking I did? Probably not, right? So I kind of regret that. But then at the same time, I very much am like, oh, I'm glad I started speaking so early because I got into the habit of it and like I could deal with you know, as you mentioned, we're adults, we can deal with the mistakes and correct them and systematically go about doing them. I think everyone's so scared because of this, like what everything that gets said on YouTube, like, oh, you know, you're going to start speaking really early. If you speak really early, you're going to end up with a load of mistakes. And everyone's going to think you know, your Mandarin, your German's terrible. And that's not the case. Like
Yeah.
I think first of all, you will have to accept whatever stage you start speaking, you're going to end up making mistakes. Like that's just inherently the case. Except that I think if you start later, you'll probably have a better intuitive sense of the language. At least that's the impression I get, right? Um, so yeah, definitely. I think it's a case of what are your goals and what does your routine look like? Like for me at the time, speaking loads of Mandarin actually kept me really motivated because of the little wins.
Yep.
But for some people who are much more introverted, that might not be the case. Like it might be a lot better to wait a lot longer by doing a lot of input instead, because it could be crushing if you know if you have an embarrassing moment and then you have this bad experience with the language. So definitely, I think that's a really very really balanced opinion on it.
Yeah. I would
So
also
it's,
jump in and just make one last point that
mm,
speaking early, I don't think it's necessarily problematic, like you said, because you can
yeah,
always you can correct mistakes. Though I will say
mm,
that knowing, for me, the concept that we are what we do repeatedly
mm,
is very important. So I'm thinking specifically of if you're spending 30 minutes a day speaking and 30 minutes a
mm,
day immersing, as opposed to an hour immersing, then
mm,
you're training your speaking muscles, but other areas are not going to work as well. And
mm,
the same thing with input. Like if like I'll speak for myself, the reason that I'm working now through
mm,
a commentary on the Bible from 1850 written in German is because that's how I've spent a lot of my time up until now, and
mm,
my speaking has suffered as a result of that.
mm,
That's a trade-off that I'm not sure whether or not I'm okay with, but it's at least a trade-off
yeah,
that I made.
yeah.
And so I think that that's important to factor in.
Definitely, yeah. No, I think whatever kind of way we do this, that's something we just have to accept, isn't it? There's always a trade-off. So it just depends on how much of a balance you can get. Like again, I'll go back and say that when I started learning Mandarin, because I did so much output, my comprehension like could have been better. Do you know what I mean? Like I could have reached a higher level of comprehension faster if I hadn't focused so much on output. But then again, there was the trade-off from that was that like my output got pretty good pretty fast because I did so much of it. So, oh, Josh, it's honestly been so interesting to talk to you about all these different aspects of language learning, and it's honestly been such a pleasure. And I really trust that it's been really helpful to my audience. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your expertise in these areas and kind of giving some really good recommendations. And once again, guys, if you haven't already, go and check out Josh's channel. All right. Thank you very much for your time, Josh.